Welcome to We Need to Name This, where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academia with scholars of color. I'm Ebony Bruce Harvey and my co-host,
Ann Jacobs.
So today's episode is entitled Advising Graduate Students. So before we get started, we'd love to introduce an amazing Black woman scholar, Dr. Chandra Alston. We're going to share her bio, and then she's going to share some of her experiences with us. So Dr. Chandra Alston is an assistant professor in literacy, policy analysis, and program evaluation in the College of Education at North Carolina State University. She has a PhD in curriculum and instruction from Stanford University. Dr. Alston began her career as a high school English teacher in North Carolina. For the past decade, she has worked to prepare secondary ELA teachers and teacher educators. Her research focused on, 1, documenting instructional practices and materials that support literacy teachers to see, empower, and support children of color. 2, pedagogies and practices to support prospective literacy teachers in acknowledging and disrupting the systemic structural inequities in facilitating discussions and teaching writing. And 3, investigating how educational policies, structures, and materials support observable positive change in literacy teachers' practice. So thank you, Chandra, for joining us today. We're really excited to discuss with you advising students, and I have a ton of questions to pick your brain.
Thank you. This is fun. This is going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Chandra. We've been starting each episode by asking our guests if they would just share a little bit about, why did you start your journey into academia? Like what brought you here today?
Okay. As you read in my bio, as Ebony read in my bio, I was a high school English teacher here in North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And as I was teaching, 2 things led me out of the classroom. One is, as you are both, having been teachers, are aware, often new teachers get the classes that no one else wants to teach, right? So what I ended up teaching without any preparation in special education were 2 mainstream classes, right? And I didn't even have a special educator working with me. They were like, oh, she'll be hired in January. That didn't happen. And in those classes, the demographics of those classes were, one class was capped at 20 and 14 of those students were Black males. And in my working with them, I thought, why are they in here? And it was, they had been labeled as behaviorally and emotionally disturbed or impaired, and they were not. And then I taught honors, and the demographics of those classes were diametrically opposed to the demographics of the mainstream classes. And I taught the same content in those classes across both of those because I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And students across those classes, engaged in rich conversations, understood the content in ways that we didn't need to be tracked in that way, right? So that was one. And then when I had student teachers, the deficit ideologies that they brought into those mainstream classes and the lack of preparation they had, those coupled led me to say, wait, there's got to be a better way. Somebody has to be doing this better. Like teachers have to be better prepared. And I didn't feel as prepared going into classes. Into my teaching, even with the master's, I didn't feel very prepared. So I felt like, we need to be able to do this better. So that led me out of the classroom into Stanford to work on curriculum and instruction.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I hear in another episode, Ebony and I talk a little bit about our own experiences, and there's certainly a lot of what you shared that's like this overlap with what we've talked about, and also with other people who come in who are former teachers who talk about what brought them to academia. It's definitely, you know, the idea of you know, equity and justice, and you know, how schools and systems label inaccurately label this in this deficit way, like the potential that students have as human beings, like, and learners. It's definitely a common thread, so I appreciate you sharing that. So this episode is all about advising, and you gotta know that Ebony and I just both think the world of you as a mentor and advisor. And I was wondering, truly, and I was wondering if you could, you know, how would you describe your approach to advising students?
So I thought a little about this question, and my approach would have to be coming, you know, from Geneva Gay and having an ethic of care. So when I advise students, I start with thinking about, you know, who they are, what they want, and then coupled with what I know about academia, and then what they need, right? And so I bring those together and try to get to know them as a whole person, to be able to kind of like help them think through what are the best decisions for them, and balance that. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about graduate students in particular. I think undergraduates is a little different. But yeah, that's how I come at it. In both cases, you know, I think about who is this person, what are they striving to do and be, and how can I kind of support, you know, and kind of guide them and coach them to get to that point, you know, and helping them miss the you know, the landmines that might be out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I know in that you talked too about advising both undergraduate and graduate students and how that might be different. So I'm wondering if you share a little bit more about how undergrads and graduate students differ in their need. And maybe if you could say a little bit more about how you differentiate your approach to those two groups.
Sure. So with graduate students, I think there's often an imposter syndrome that we have to deal with. And there's a hidden curriculum that we have to kind of make explicit. And it's, you know, a longer kind of relationship generally that you're building. And you're kind of, if they're going into academia, which they don't have to, and that's part of my mentoring as well, then there's a bit of uncovering of that and kind of like modeling, right? Whereas in undergraduates, there might be imposter syndrome as well, but there's also more focus on, or here are the courses you need to take, here's what you need to do in terms of, yes, office hours are a thing, you need to go to them. I don't care if you don't have anything to say, make your face seen, like, and that's still unpacking the hidden curriculum, but at a different kind of level. Here are the ways that you do that. Here are the courses that you need to take. Yes, you need to show up. Let me monitor, you know, your performance and nudge you in the right direction. So that is a bit more. I mean, I get to know my undergraduates, but it's less of a long-term relation. It's more of like a checking in, okay, kind of like, all right, let me push you along, you know, that homeroom kind of like, okay, here's your place where you check in. Let me see if everything's okay. Do you need a counselor? But then let's go, let's move you on. Whereas graduate students is a longer-term relationship. And often, you know, Ebony will tell you, it's a lifelong guarantee. You know, I talk about that. My advisor is the same way. I texted her yesterday, right? It's a lifelong guarantee. Whereas I don't expect that with my undergraduates. You know, I still keep in contact with many of them, even some of the high school students, but I don't anticipate that it'll be like this long-term relationship.
Yeah. I mean, you can ask Chandra. When she was leaving Michigan, I was holding onto her ankle as she was dragging me across the floor. Like, please don't go. So Chandra, you shared with us the differences between mentoring and advising graduate students and undergraduates. So I will have to mentor and advise both undergraduates and graduates. And I want you to share with me some of the challenges in mentoring each group. So as you know, I've mentored high school students, right? Undergrads, graduate students are at different places in their lives, different trajectories. And often like graduate students are very diverse in terms of their life experiences, what they come to graduate school to do. And so I wanted to know, what are some challenges in working with each of the groups? Because what I found with master's students is like, you'll have a range of like ages, right? So there's just so much different experiences in how they're coming and approaching, whereas undergrads are usually, well, traditional undergrads are usually around 18, 19 to 23 maybe, unless you have one or two non-traditional students. So can you tell me a little bit about the challenges of like supporting both those groups?
So with undergrads, I think the challenges are like getting face-to-face time, right? Or at least shifting the ways that you engage with them. So many of them would prefer to text you, like, or email, and it was like, okay, that's not my, maybe I'm showing my age. That's not the way I roll. I would prefer that you not have my phone number. But figuring out ways that work in terms of communication, I think is key, right? So like I have an undergraduate right now who has to see me in an advising meeting before he can register. But he's waiting, like he was supposed to register yesterday. And I know he's seen that he cannot actually register for classes until he meets with me, but he still hasn't signed up to meet with me, right? And I get it. You don't want to do another Zoom meeting. Like what? Come on, right? But I keep nudging and sending a little nudge, and then who else can I get? So I've got the head of the program to nudge and send out a text to his phone through our system to get face to face with him, right? And so finding ways of making sure to communicate and saying, okay, here's what we need to accomplish. And so there's a scale, right? So for him, it's just going to be, he's going to meet with me. We're going to talk about what courses you're going to get, and boom, right? Where there are other students who are like, oh, can you help me think through, is this the right way to go? And so, with undergraduates, one is, I think, getting them to understand how you're there to help them, right? And communicating in ways that you both are comfortable with, right? With master's students, you're right, they spanned all sorts, right? And I think along those lines is similar, helping them understand what you offer them in order to help them get what they want, right? And that's, when I worked at Michigan and we had master's students in the teaching and learning, they were all over the place, right? And so part of me was like, okay, I did a little survey. What are you trying to get out of this, right? Okay, tell me what you're trying to get out of this. What questions do you have about the program of study, right? And so it helped my agenda be much more pointed. Okay, this is what you're trying to get out of this. Here's the program of study. Here's some courses you might take. Have you thought about those? What else have you thought about? And really like get down to business and move it along, because many of them are teaching, are parenting, like we ain't got time. So let's move this along, right? And many of them are kind of adept at figuring these things out. So my goal with master's students is to say, let's get down to business. Here's what I can do to help you. What questions do you have? Are you good? Let them know that I'm there to check in with and move it along. Sometimes if I'm really good, right, I'll add a note to my calendar, every few months to like check in with master's students, right? And then I'll send out an email. Hey, how's it going? You need anything? Boom. And then if they respond, great. If they don't, great, right? Then, and then move it along. Whereas with graduate students, it's a more long-term, let me get to know you, what you're trying to do kind of thing.
And so for folks who are mentoring PhD students, what's some advice you give to them? And then what are some challenges in advising PhD students? I know you're tempted to say none, you know what I'm saying? But I'm sure you can dig up a few challenges.
Yeah. Present company not included, right? Present company not included.
I feel like I was just easy breezy, okay? Probably not, but still, we can pretend.
So, there's a theme, right? You got to have a plan of attack and an agenda. I learned as I went that when students wanted to meet with me, they needed to send an agenda, right? And so that triggers to them, oh, this isn't just me coming in her office, right? Well, I have an open door policy on certain days, right? And if it's open, that means you can come in. If it's ajar, that means she in there. But if it ain't important, right? And if it's closed, it means, hey, maybe she ain't in there. I don't know. Or maybe she is if I can see the light, but it means not to come in, right? And so over time, graduate students learned, how to detect, and how to infer whether or not I was available. But scheduling meetings, I would say, what's your agenda, right? Like if you just want to schedule a meeting with me, like if you're taking 15, 30 minutes of my time, what is it for, right? And so part of, it's part of your job, but it's not all of your job. So you try to balance and you try to be productive and efficient, right? And so them having agenda, like when we get into the writing with graduate students, they would have to send writing in advance, right? And it would vary in what it was, right? And I never said like any writing, like if it's a couple paragraphs, good. I would always give the example of, and I think Ebony, I gave this to you, that I submitted a chapter to my advisor, and I found a copy of what's the book, like Hansel and Gretel, and then I had breadcrumbs, like I was trying to be funny, right? And I put it on there with a note that said, "You're gonna need this to get in and out of this chapter, because I don't even know I don't even know, right?" But part of it is that you have to give the advisor something to work with, right? And we know that it's often hard to share our writing with people, right? And so I would try to make that much more approachable, right? And say, look, sometimes my writing makes no sense, but someone else has to read it and help me make some sense out of it, right? And if you get stuck in that point where you're not submitting to your advisor, that's a problem, right? You're not going to move. And we all know that, right? But we had to learn that some harder than others, right? And so one thing is like, how do you get graduate students to actually trust you, right? And I think some advisors think, oh, I have a PhD, they should just trust me. And I think it don't always work that way. And so how do you build that trust, right? It goes back to an ethic of care, that you've shown that you care about this individual as a whole person, and that they can trust you to give constructive feedback that will lead them to the goal that they want, right? And so, that's what I would do. I would build in those first couple meetings a repertoire, like I would check in and build so that when we got to the hard parts, right? It's what you do in teaching, right? You build a relationship so that when a student says something in a discussion and you push back, they're like, oh, they did that out of love, right? Or if they do something crazy, you look at them like, no, that's not how we roll. They know it's out of love, right? And so when I give that hard feedback and, my students are not happy with me, when I can see it, they still know, right? Like, she gave me this feedback because she's trying to help better my writing, my analysis skills, right? They know where it's coming from, right? So, I say all that to say, like, you set a foundation of care. You set that there's also efficiency that needs to happen right? Like we got to be about it. We got to be about business. We got to get this done, right? That there's an agenda to these meetings. You set time that is open, but you also have to set time for your other work. And when that door is closed, like you have to balance. I think many of us in this present company go into these fields because we care about individuals, right? And so then we want to give as much time to those face-to-face and giving feedback and teaching. And we should, but we also have to balance our other needs, right? Our self-care, our writing, our research, whatever else we're doing, right? Like we have to balance. And so, there's work in figuring out what that balance is, but those are ways that I've worked to try to do that.
So you mentioned that you use those first couple of meetings to like build relationships. So what does your initial meeting look like for graduate students and undergraduate students? So like as coming in as a graduate student, I don't know what an agenda, like I don't even know what the agenda is. I don't even know what I'm supposed to know, right? Yeah. So how do you start, have those initial meetings with your graduate students and your undergrads to kind of set them and give them the pace and kind of open up and explain like what it is, we're going to be doing moving forward together?
So I started much like you started this interview. I was like, what is the problem that brought you here? Right. And sometimes I already know because I read your application. Right. But I want to hear what you had to say, because sometimes that changes from the application. Right. So what brought you here? Right. What are you excited about? What are you nervous about? Right. So I try to get to what do you need? Right. And what do you need from me? What do you think you need from me? Right. Because sometimes you don't know. Right. Yeah. You're like, I don't. Right. But it's a scale. Some people do. Some people come in, right, and they, have this capital. Their parents have PhDs, or they grew up in a college town, or whatever, right? And they know, or at least they have an idea, right? And we start answering questions. So we go from a big of like, how are you? How did you get here? What are you looking to get from this? To kind of like nitty gritty, what courses have you signed up for? Have you figured out where, your places of worship, your shopping, like, and we get into all that. Do you have any questions about that? And I do that not because that's necessarily part of advising, but it's a part of how I help them see that I'm interested in the whole person, right? Are there things that I can do to help you, adjust to your life here in this new place, right? And so that's what the first meetings are about. And I guess I use my experience of having moved across the country, literally from East Coast to West Coast, and feeling like, soon I'm going to say something in one of these meetings that Stanford is going to go, wait, did we let her in? What? Right. And so I use that to kind of as my baseline, right? And so then I try to kind of normalize that, and not, there were things that I didn't want to ask about because I felt like if I ask, that's going to out me as not knowing, right? And I wanted my advising to be a place where you could ask those questions, and that I would actually anticipate and just kind of give you that information. So you ain't have to ask, right? So you say face, you ain't got to ask. I'm just going to go ahead and give you that information and just act like, there it is. I don't need to know whether or not you knew. There it is. And so those first meetings are to set that stage and to make sure you don't go off track. Because like when I started, I was like, oh, I'll take that course. Oh, I'll take that course. Oh, You're like, no. Oh, I want to do, no. And so Ebony will tell you this. I would go, so why are you thinking about that? And she would, come to interpret that to me, no, I shouldn't do it. And it's not necessarily no, but it's like, let's think this through to make sure this fits what you said. So I would keep a notebook when I met with my advising students. And it was, I go back to my trapper keeper days. Like I have different, different like labels. And, teachers love these kind of things. And like one would be for Ebony, one would be for some and such, right? And I keep my notes. And it was like, oh, well, you said you wanted to do X. So how does that fit in with that? And then they go, oh. And if they did that, I was like, well, what do you think? Should you? No. Or how does it fit? And you're like, well, actually, this is now how I want to think about that. Okay, well, then that makes sense. Go for it. Right. And so I wanted to be a sounding board, like to reflect back. Okay, here's what you told me.
Especially if you want to get out in 5 years.
Right.
You can't be playing games.
Right. You've got funding for this long. So here's right. Let's think this thing through, right? And for students who like financially, this thing has to, right? So we have to think about, like, if I know all of those things, then I can better, like an ethic of care. It's like when I know all, I can make better decisions of how to support a student, right? And so I can make better decisions about how to support students based on what they've already told me, right? And then over time, those meetings become less frequent until we get to the dissertation, right? Until we get to that writing. And then they become more and more frequent. You see me more than you probably see, significant others. You're like, oh, here she is again. I get to see her again. Right? Because we got to move this thing along. Right?
I remember in our first meeting, you're like, so how often do you want to meet? And I'm like, every 2 weeks, like for the rest of the year. And you were like, okay. It's like, yes, every 2 weeks.
So with new graduate students, I read regularly for that first semester, right? And then it's a weaning process for some.
I mean, I've met with Anita. She asked me that, and I said, I don't know, maybe every week forever, and that's what we done. There is no gradual release of responsibility for me.
Well, so we meet regularly that first semester, right? And once you get your land legs under you, I then we stretch it out, right? And we meet, once a month, or if there's something comes up, my schedule always has, it used to, a few openings where you can get in, right? And I try not to let people hog those openings, right? And then, and so then it spreads out, because once you have your courses, then you kind of just move along the program. And then when you hit candidacy, it's like, okay, what now, right? And so when we start working on the proposal and things of that sort, the meetings become more frequent, right? Yeah. Until we hit that end where we meet often, right? And I use my mentoring as an example. By the time I got ready to do my job talks, I saw my advisor lots. I mean, her pets knew me, right? Her dog was like, oh, it's you again. Hello. To the point where it's like, oh, it's you again. Hello. Right? So, I think that prepared me well. And so I use that as a model.
So we kind of got into it, how often you meet with students throughout the tenure of the program. So I'm going to move to the next question in terms of how do you track student long-term progress? So you talked about graduate students, particularly you have your book, you have your notes, you're like, hey, you trying to take this course? Skirt. Is that with what you want to do? You know what I'm saying? Right? But how do you track your undergrads, right? So I feel like with undergrads, you do the course thing or whatever, but okay, if they don't pass a course, or there's maybe a report that they're falling behind, or those types of things, how do you track your undergrads progress over time? And then are there other ways that you track your graduate students, or that's pretty self-directed once you're saying generally this is the way you're going?
Right. So yeah, with the grad students, there's a notebook, and here's my one for here, right? So I've got a notebook, and I've got little tabs in it, and I've got my students, and I got space for each student, and I just keep my notes, right? And I'll highlight things. I should go to my iPad, but it's, yeah, I'm not there yet. I don't know if I'm gonna get there either, but anyway. Another thing I do is I have folders in my inbox, right? And so I have a folder for students, and then I have graduate students, and then I have masters and undergrads, and each in those folders, everybody has a named folder. So it would be Jacobs LA, it would be Pruse Harvey E, right? And emails that refer to you go into that folder, right? And therefore I can find them when I need them, right? So like an undergraduate of mine who keeps emailing me about what courses he's supposed to take, and I'm like, look, we just had a 30-minute meeting, you can't keep up with this, right? And my response, that goes into his folder, right? Our system here, so one thing is to think about what systems your universities or places of employment have in place. We have a system in place where I send out what's called a campaign, right, to the students. And it tells when my schedule is available, and it's for them to set up advising appointments. And so they set them up through there, and it sends the email directly. It's, it populates all the text, it sends it to them. I can set up reminders. And in that space is also where I take notes. So when I meet with them, I have it open and I have their courses up. So it's like a split screen, and I take notes. And if I fill out that kind of little form and check off the boxes of what courses they've taken, I take a picture of it and save it as a PDF there, right? And so everything is centrally located there. And if I forget what they were supposed to be doing, I log into there and find that information. And so it's a matter of thinking about what systems your university has in place or your place of employment has in place, and leveraging those. Like some of my colleagues don't use that. I don't understand why. Right, because it just keeps it all there. And other people who are advising, so like one of my students is an athlete, his athletic advisor can check that as well, right? And so emails that I get about that go into the email folder, and then everything about their courses is set there. If it wasn't there, then I would just, like, I save things in a folder. Like I have, one of the best things I got was from a Division K thing where it's like, oh, you need to have these folders. And so I was like, okay, I've got a scholarship, I got a research, and I got a teaching folder, right? And the teaching is teaching and advising, and under teaching is advising, and I've got folders for all my students. So like I still have all of Ebony's drafts of everything, right? And all the letters of recommendation that I haven't cleaned out anything, right? And so they're all there.
Okay.
There comes a point where I don't need copies of chapter 4 of your dissertation. There comes a point where I don't need that.
Promise me though that you'll just keep the dissertation. You can delete all the drafts. I'll keep them just in case you feel nostalgic. I can always email them back to you, but just keep a copy of the dissertation.
I got a copy right next to me right now.
Right, but I have like, so I don't have to track down the email that she sent with all that stuff in it. Like, so I just make it a point that as soon as I get it, it goes into that folder. Like I download that file into that folder, or if you use Drive, Google Drive now, you can do it that way. And it's there, all the letters of recommendation. There's an LOR, letter of recommendation folder under Ebony's name. And then the copious number of letters of recommendation that I've written for her are there, right? And here's the thing though, that's useful because, when she asked for me to write another letter of recommendation, I can pull from the ones I've already written, right? And I don't have to like reinvent the wheel. So it's another way of saving time for me, and like managing this job is to keep all those in one place, right? A colleague of mine in there keeps a running record, right? So there's a document, a notes file that she keeps in there, and she just, met with Ebony March 31st, 3 bullets, boom, and close it up. And then you can open that up again when you meet next, if you want to go the fancy high-tech route and don't want a notebook with, stickies.
Okay, thank you. So that's great. So I think for me, now I'm already thinking about how to organize. So at my university, when I start advising, I'm actually going to have like a mentor for the semester.
Mm-hmm.
So I can
Mm-hmm.
start, getting, used to like the courses that are given, all that kind of stuff
Yeah.
and how
Mm-hmm.
that works. So I'm excited about that. But this is great because it helps me like think about, okay, so how can I organize and make sure that I'm keeping track of all my students long term and keeping track of how they're doing and how they're progressing over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pass it over to Laura Ann to continue.
Oh, wow. Yes. Thank you, Chandra, for all that. And something that's so striking to me is you talk about the ethics of care and like, building trusting relationships and things like that. I mean, for me, when I first met you, it's like what really, struck me was your responsiveness to like who I was and like the things I was struggling with, like particularly like not being a teacher anymore. I was like, I don't think I should be in grad school because I think I should still be teaching in a classroom. And you're like, I think maybe, have you thought that maybe this could be grief? And I was like, I mean, no, but I'm definitely gonna go cry about that after I leave here today. And it was like a moment, it was like a big moment for me. I was like, oh, I feel like seen and understood, and now I can begin this next step. And in that meeting, I don't, something about teacher ed, you were like, okay, I see you, I honor you, and now we're gonna shift into what can we do? And I was like, this is like I'm getting both real intense right now. Like I'm getting this like, you are a whole human. Here's what we're doing for you. And like for me, I was just like, oh, this is what's up. And also, for me as a graduate student, I may be a little wacky where like I need to know that you see me as a whole human, or I don't want your help. I don't care how good it is.
I don't think that's wacky. I think that's human nature.
Yeah.
And what you're saying goes back to, so one thing you have to understand is that one of my mother has had a master's in education and counseling, right? And she does training of faculty. And she did training of faculty, right? And administrators, like chancellors and like deans and associate deans. So you can imagine like this Black woman walking in, a bunch of mostly white men and trying to tell them what to do, right? And so this is how she also worked with me. Oh, okay, I see you. Okay, have what your feelings. Okay, and now we need to work, right? And so what you say like blesses me because that's mom. That's my mom, right? And that's how she approached life, right? Okay, yeah, that doesn't feel that's what's going on right now. All right, have it, feel it, yes. All right, and now.
And let's yeah.
We're not gonna sit there.
Yep.
We acknowledge it's normal. We acknowledge this is what human beings deal with. Change, even good change, has some grief involved.
Yeah.
And then we move. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate and admire it. It's something I certainly want to take up. So, as I think about what my future could be. And so I think I'm wondering, this conversation is definitely like thinking about advice for faculty members who will be advising. So I do want to like kind of switch a little bit and ask like maybe if you could say to students, what are things that maybe some qualities or a few that key points that you would say like when you are seeking an advisor, what are some of the things you should be attuned to know that you're going to get the support and like like you said, the human nature, the humanization that you need to be able to sit in the feeling and move through it. I'm of the opinion that being seen as a person is necessary for doing the work. How do you know that you're with somebody who's on that same page and not someone who's like, can you just shut up about your personal life and let's just like get on to like, I got a paper for you, can you leave now? Like, how do you know you're not getting that at an initial contact?
That's interesting. I think so. When I think about the qualities that make a good mentor, I mean, they shift based on who you are and where you are, right? Some people are fine with divorcing who they are from what they do, right? Gloria Latson Billings was here just a couple of days ago, and she was talking about this. Like, you can have a job. There's a job, and then there's work, right? There's a job where you go and get a paycheck, and then there's the work that you do. And, you know, if it's a job and you're just kind of like phoning it in, it's fine that that's going to be. But if this is about the work, and I think particularly for those of us um, of color and who are coming at this as trying to disrupt power and seeing, you know, marginalized youth as whole, brilliant, beautiful, courageous individuals, it's not just a job. You know, it's what gets us up in the morning. It's what keeps us up at night. It's like it's the same, right? It's our passion. And for some people, that's not what it is. And I think if you can find people where, you know, whose passions align, right? They don't have to be the exact thing, right? They don't have to be that they, like if you think about Ebony and me, right? My exact thing is not disability, right? That's not my exact thing. But my thing really is like, you have to see children, right? This ain't about you and your like whatever, right? And I think if you look at their work, if you look at who they surround themselves with, if you talk to other students who work with them, right? That's where you get the, and this is why when students want to work with me, the first thing I do is like, oh, go talk to the students who already work with me, because they will give you the down and dirty, right? They will tell you, nope, keep moving, or oh yeah, or this is what you're gonna get, right? And I think people who don't want you to talk to their graduate students is also a sign, right? And it might not, you might have to ask, right? It might not occur to me initially, oh, here, go talk to, but if you ask and you don't get that you could read something there, right? So I think those are the ways of thinking about who you're working with, right? Look at their work. How do they talk about children? How do they talk about youth, right? How is that presented? You know, what questions do they ask? Do they align in some ways with the things that you're, you know, passionate about, interested in? Who do they work with, right? So I think we tell ourselves in our work, right? And I think reading that work carefully and critically, both for its content and craft, right? I'm a writing teacher. So both for the content and the craft will let you know who this person is, right? And I think students should do a better job of do a more critical. I mean, we're all like, oh, I got in, right? Like that's what we think about. Versus, okay, I got in, but this is the person I've been working with for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, right? Right. And you can switch advisors, right? And you know, you can also have other advisors, right? You know, that's also something to think about, right? I had my primary advisor, but there were people on my committee, there were people outside of the institution, right? Like I met Carol Lee at a conference and she was like, come here, baby. And I was like up on her set for the like now for eternity. Like Carol knows me. That is, yeah, here we go, right? Let's milk it until she's like, please stop calling me, right? she hasn't gotten there yet. In fact, what I get from her is an email every so often, please call me. I'm like, oh, what did I do? But you know, did something, oh, yeah, right. But you know, and so you find those other people as well. But yeah, that I think, you know, being a better, like critical in terms of who is going to be that mentor for you. I think students have to do that work.
Okay. Thank you. That's things I wish I'd known. But also, you know, I feel like a very fortunate person in my life. So I think that I've also, you know, not unpleased with my own situation, though I was certainly not critical about how I entered it.
I think for some of us, especially first gen, like we're just like, oh, we got in, yay, you know. I'm glad to have been accepted, right? And it's the same thing with jobs and like negotiating. Like, oh, they gave me a job. I'm like, yeah, wait, let's think about what they offered you, right? And as women also, like we don't negotiate, we don't push back, we don't And we should, because, we're badasses. We're amazing. And, we need to understand that. Like, my time is valuable, my brain is, valuable. And what I bring is valuable. My experiences, my knowledge, my capacity, right?
I hear that. Thank you, Chandra. I have one last question for you if we have the time for it, which is again, so this is kind of talking about the focus of this episode is focusing on it's for faculty who may be new to advising. So wondering, what advice do you have for new faculty who are just advising graduate students for the first time as they're entering into it? Are there like really some key ideas that you really want to emphasize to conclude with?
Right. I think it's first thinking about how you were mentored, what was good about it, what wasn't so great about it, what your strengths are in terms of mentoring and advising, what you're comfortable with, right? And being explicit about that with students, thinking carefully about time management and balance. It's a big job, right? That academia asks of you, right? There's research, there's teaching, there's advising, there's, publishing. So you have to be honest with yourself and then with students about what your capacity is and where your strengths lie, right? When I started doing research on writing, my advisor was like, that ain't me. Here's the people you need to contact, right? And that's how I ended up with Sarah Friedman on my committee, who was, that writing was her thing, right? And my advisor was like, that's not me, right? And she's very upfront and very clear. Nope. I can talk about your writing, but not the research on writing. That's not my thing. And I'm not gonna like sit here and then try to figure it all out. Like with Ebony, I was like, I taught special, special ed, but that's, you got to find somebody else, right? Who will speak to that. That's not me, right? And so being upfront about that. Also setting kind of standards. Like I had a student who refused to submit things for our meetings. I was like, so we're not meeting, right? We're at a point where chapters are due. You don't submit them, we're not meeting. I mean, why am I sit here talk for you for 30 minutes when I don't have anything to talk to you about?
Yeah.
Right. And that was hard for me as a person, right? To say, like, I did it 2 or 3 times. I was like, okay, we're not going to do this. Right. And to be able to hold that, right. And then the student got quite angry with me. There were some ugly emails that I got, right. But to be like, right. And I even, I had people mentoring me in this. And like, oh, what do you do in these cases, right? Just like you talked about, you have someone who's mentoring you. Like I have someone that I went to and it's like, oh, this is what's happening. And they're like, yeah, that happens. This is how I responded. What you're doing is okay. I think that's fine, right? To just check in, be like, wait, is this right? And so, setting those boundaries, being clear in your expectations, following up on those. It's kind of like parenting.
For real.
Right? Like, not taking it personally, right? Sometimes it is, but like you can't keep that, right? Yeah. But yeah, and knowing that it's part of your job, but also it's not the whole entire of your job, and that you have to be okay with giving what you can. And then, right, it's the whole thing, right? Give what you can, do your best in those moments, be fully present. Like when I'm meeting with graduate students or as students, I'm not like trying to do 5 and other things. No, right? I'm there, I'm present. You have that. If that's your 30 minutes, you got your 30 minutes. And then look, we got to get it in and then we go, right? And that's why I put them back to back, because then we can't They're like, oh, somebody's at the door, got to go, right? I schedule them right before other things because people take up your time. You have to learn, right? That people will take up your time, and it's not being, I think, unkind. It's being respectful of your time and theirs, right? Let's be efficient. Let's do this. You have my undivided attention, but you have it for this amount of time, and we're gonna work, and then I'll see you next time. And so I got careful about when I would schedule meetings, not when I had all this other time. No. You schedule them, yeah, back to back, and then I have a hard stop, right? I got to go pick up my kid, bye, right? Or I got to go to class, or I've got to go to a meeting, so that they don't linger, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's a process of learning, right? And keeping track of what works, what doesn't.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'll be calling you when I start to on my own.
Well, I mean, at least you have a mentor, right? Yeah. It's some people don't. You just kind of get thrown in. But still you need to ask other people, right? In your program, in your department, like, oh, does this work? And get, friendly with the staff that also, support, because that's where the knowledge is, right? That's where the deep institutional knowledge is. It's not in other faculty members, because we didn't graduate from this program. We ain't got a clue. We just we're looking at sheets of paper that people send us to make sure we on track, right? But it's the staff who know the deal, right? And can help you think through, oh, okay, this is how this works, and this is what they have, the institutional knowledge. So it's finding those people. It's like when you started teaching, it's the secretaries, right? You get in good with the secretaries
and the custodians. You getting good with
the custodians,
okay? They be hooking a sister up, okay?
Right, and then you can have those pizza parties and do all this great thing. They don't, so you have to know who to get in good with, right? And you get in good with those people, and they help you out. They let you can send them a quick email, and they respond right away. Oh, it's okay, baby, and they help you out. But so yeah, but I think the hardest part for me has been curtailing how much time I give students, because again, we come in this because we want to help people, but we have to balance. And so I think scheduling out what times are available, when those times are available for students. I do the Google Calendar, right? And really not letting it go all over the place. Maintaining those boundaries, scheduling in when you get other things done. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. You have given us so much good advice. So I'll be looking at this again, taking my notes down.
I feel like I was just mumbling and through it all, but hopefully there was something in there. Yeah, that's what did we say at the beginning of this, Laura Ann? You're like, I think I did okay, right?
I mean, I hear you. I see it, Chandra. I mean, I found this conversation to be energizing. Energizing, yeah.
Well, I hope so. I hope it's useful.
It is, definitely.
Yeah, it's not something we prepare people to do. So then, therefore, you get a range of kind of mentoring, right, based on what other people what they bring. And that shouldn't necessarily be the case, but graduate school, where do you fit that, right? I don't know.
I think sometimes folks have experiences where they're kind of hazed by their advisors, and then they think that's the way to advise other people.
Yeah.
So this episode is saying, no, that's not what you do.
Instead of being like, that didn't feel good, so let's not do that again.
Yeah.
No, it's more like, I survived. No, this isn't the military.
Yeah. Exactly.
This ain't boot camp. This ain't boot camp.
Mm-mm.
Why? And even why are we doing this to people? Yeah. Definitely. So there's a lot of that. And you might have pushback from colleagues. I had pushback from colleagues like, oh, why, your students seem happy.
What an insult.
Should they not?
Thank you. Come on.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be miserable or something?
Mm-mm. It ain't the way.
No.
Well, Chandra, thank you so much. You want to be mindful of your time. So we talk so much about time, but we want to thank you so much for hanging out with us and sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thank you. It's good seeing you both.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for We Need to Name This, a series where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe. Join us for our next episode, Leaving Academia with Dr. Tabitha Bentley. For more information, visit www.weneedtonamethis.com.